What's the best way to configure jobs in Jenkins? There's a remarkably easy answer to this, and it is Jenkinsfiles. What's a Jenkinsfile, you ask? Let's take a look. A Jenkinsfile defines the build pipeline of your application in a Jenkins-specific language. There are two different syntaxes for a Jenkinsfile. One is the declarative pipeline and the other one is the scripted pipeline. The example we see here is the scripted pipeline. You can download this Jenkins file along with the simple application it builds by visiting getintodevops.com/code. The benefit of using a Jenkins file to define your continuous delivery pipeline is that it is stored in version control along with the code it's building. This allows the Jenkins file to be versioned with your code, so any changes to the continuous delivery pipeline can be traced back in version control just as any other code change. In this particular Jenkins file, we are using the Jenkins Docker pipeline plugin to build a Docker image out of our application. Let's look at the stages we define. In the first stage, we will clone the repository. The checkout SCM command is a shortcut telling Jenkins to clone the same branch this Jenkins file was obtained from into the workspace. In the second stage, we tell the Docker pipeline plugin to build our Docker image. This is just the same as calling docker build on the command line. In the third stage, we have a placeholder for tests. As you can see, we're only echoing the string tests passed here. The interesting thing to note though is that we're doing this in an app.inside block. This tells Jenkins to execute all commands in this block inside a container of the image we just built. If our image contained, for example, a test framework, we could trigger it at this stage. Another approach for testing could be to run, for example, a Selenium standalone container alongside the image we just built and run a bunch of automated end-to-end tests against our application. I think that's pretty cool. The fourth and final stage concludes our pipeline. We're pushing the image we just built into a Docker Hub registry with credentials that we have defined as Jenkins credentials. This avoids us having to push credentials into the code repository, which is always a bad idea. As you can see, we're pushing the image twice, first with the build number and then with the latest tag. Pushing the same image multiple times is cheap because all the file system layers are reused. In this particular example, we're building a Docker image, but we could just as well invoke maven or make or a bunch of bash scripts to build and deploy a different kind of application. And by all means, you are not limited to 4 stages or these particular stages. Just make sure that the first stage has the checkout SCM command in it to ensure that the workspace has a copy of your code in it. So, let's take a look at how we'll make Jenkins build a pipeline out of this Jenkins file. After logging into Jenkins, the first thing we'll do is add credentials. We'll need 2 sets of credentials, first to clone our code repository and second to push our Docker image into Docker Hub. For GitHub, I'm using a personal access token which enables Jenkins to use the GitHub API with my credentials while I have the 2-factor authentication enabled. The second credentials we add are for Docker Hub. The important thing to note is that the ID we add here must be the same we reference to in the Jenkins file. Then let's create the actual job. For the job type, we will use a multi-branch pipeline. This is a special job type that automatically creates a separate pipeline for all the branches in our repository. This will allow us to build an image from every feature branch. If we wanted to do different things for different branches, we could write the logic inside the Jenkins file. The only thing we need to define in the job configuration itself is where to find our Jenkins file. As our code sits in GitHub, we will just need to give Jenkins the name of the GitHub owner and select the repository. As we can see, the build configuration is set to use Jenkinsfile by default. First, Jenkins will scan the list of branches in our repository and select the ones that have a Jenkinsfile in them. In this particular repository, we only have the master branch, and Jenkins has now created a job for it. By looking at the console log, we can see that the job is well underway. In fact, Jenkins is already pushing the image into Docker Hub. The console log shows us output from all the stages we defined in the Jenkins file. By looking at the branch view, we can see a summary of the stages we defined. As we can see, Jenkins was rather quick building our pipeline. Finally, in the topmost job view, we can see the list of branches and their build statuses.